If the Founding Fathers were alive today, they would be on the forefront of demanding constitutional change and constitutional amendments. Too often we frame this debate about amending the Constitution as whether or not someone believes the Founding Fathers were good. And the thing with this debate is it's entirely irrelevant. The Founding Fathers wrote very explicitly how they intended the Constitution to work, and right now it is not working that way. For example, they created a government where the legislature was by far the most powerful branch. You can see this, for example, in the way that the legislature is able to remove the president, to remove justices from the Supreme Court or from any court. Neither the Supreme Court nor any other court nor the presidency is able to do that to legislators. At least supposedly, this is the way it works. In reality, we now live in an upside down world where the opposite is true. The president is able to remove many legislators that he does not like simply by, for example, threatening to primary them or by redrawing their legislative districts. The Supreme Court is not only allowing gerrymandering, but only in Republican-led states, but even specifically choosing the maps that they want. So most Democratic states that have tried to respond to Republican gerrymandering with their own gerrymanders, the Supreme Court has struck down most of those maps while allowing virtually all Republican maps. And again, even, like I said, picking specific maps that would get rid of specific legislators they don't like. This is the opposite of how the system was supposed to work. Meanwhile, Congress has no ability to impeach judges or the president because members of the party of those justices or president will never go along with it. This is the system breaking down and working exactly backwards from the way the Founding Fathers wanted it to. Which, by the way, partisanship is currently just a feature built into the system. Unless we get rid of the First Amendment, we are not going back to the way things were because we have a highly partisan, nationalized media landscape. This is something that wasn't even technologically possible in the founders' time. But if they saw the way it was working right now, they would be saying, we need to make some changes. I agree with the Founding Fathers that the legislature should be the most important branch of government. The solution is called proportional representation. How does proportional representation work? Well, it's very simple. Rather than your geographic area picking your representative or gerrymandering picking your representative, you are able to pick a representative anywhere in the country to represent you. There are maybe 15 or 20 political parties, and you simply vote for the one that you believe in. Not only does this guarantee that you get representation, right now, if you vote for the loser in a district, you essentially have no representation because the other side won. But in this system, you're guaranteed to have a representative because you vote for somebody and they'll make it into Congress. If a party gets, 5% of the vote, then they get 5% of the seats in Congress. And this also shifts the debate away from why the other party is so bad towards what vision do you actually have for the future. And that's so important right now with our national, partisan media environment. Negative polarization is driving a lot of the current dysfunction. This allows us to discuss ideas, allows us to discuss what we actually want, and then we can vote directly for those things. But you might ask, well, okay, let's say there's a bunch of different parties and each of them only has like 5% of the seats. How does the government form? A lot of parties, so you might have to have 5 or 10 different political parties forming together to elect a prime minister. Now, this again actually solves a lot of things that the Founding Fathers wanted to achieve, because now if there's executive overreach, if the prime minister ends up doing something wrong, they can be removed immediately. All it takes is one political party walking away for their government to fall. It also adds back elite vetting into the system, because the Founding Fathers, they wanted there to be some process of elite vetting. So somebody like Donald Trump could never gain power. And that was sort of the purpose of the Electoral College. But as we all know, the Electoral College is not working the way the Founding Fathers intended it for it to do. People weren't supposed to vote for parties or vote for a politician. They were supposed to vote for somebody who would get in a room and deliberate and then pick a president. Well, guess what proportional representation does? It is exactly that process. You're not voting for whoever the prime minister is going to be. You pick somebody who represents you. They sit in a room, deliberate, and then pick the prime minister. That is exactly the system the founding fathers wanted us to have. We actually see an example of how this works, how it would keep somebody like Donald Trump out of office in Germany. There is a far-right party there that is widely believed to be sort of anti-democracy called the AfD. They are not in government right now. Why? Because the other parties refuse to work with them. If somebody like Donald Trump were to rise up and get maybe 20% of the vote, I don't think he would have gotten 47% of the vote or whatever in this system, because there'd be so many other parties to choose from. A lot of center-right people wouldn't have been negatively polarized into voting for someone that, frankly, back in 2016, a lot of them didn't like that much. So let's say he gets 20% of the vote. Everybody just says, Donald Trump is trying to burn the system down. We're not working with him. Yeah, he's going to maybe shift the discourse. The presence of him in Parliament will shift the discourse a little bit, because now maybe you have to work with, center-right working with center-left to kind of bring people together, but you won't be working with absolute lunatics, because nobody wants to work with Donald Trump. Let's go through the checklist of what this restores that the founding fathers wanted and that we should want too. First, does it include checks and balances and compromise in the legislature? Yes, it does. Rather than the current system where if the two chambers of Congress are controlled by opposite parties, absolutely nothing gets done, which, by the way, that partisan gridlock was the founding fathers, one of their biggest fears. And it is what we have right now. If the branches of government are controlled by different parties, literally nothing will happen. No reform, no law, no matter how essential, will get passed. If they're controlled by the same party, then you might as well just have one branch of government, because those two chambers are barely acting. The second chamber is barely acting as a check on the first one. So this system restores the way it was originally supposed to work. Even if you become the prime minister, you still have to work with 5 to 10 other parties in order to keep your government together. This means you have to deliberate. You have to debate what's actually good for the country. And people who vote for that have to really feel like this is in line with the vision they believe in. So it restores that. It restores a powerful legislature with checks and balances and deliberation and compromise built into it. Does it make the legislature the most powerful branch? It does, because a lot of the powers currently held by the president would instead be held by a prime minister. And the advantage of this, from the founding fathers' perspective as well as from our perspective, is that an executive which is committing executive overreach can be instantaneously removed by any of the political parties that form part of their coalition. So if you are overreaching and overstepping your constitutional bounds, trying to in some way reinforce some permanent advantage for your party, well, any of your coalition partners would benefit from immediately causing your government to fall and replacing you with somebody else. This is much stronger than the current process, which is no check at all, because no president is ever going to be impeached under the current system. We aren't going back to the way that politics used to work in America unless we get rid of the First Amendment, which obviously neither the founding fathers nor us would want to do, because right now we have a nationalized media environment. Just thanks to technology, we're not rolling that back. But we can reform the system, which, again, this is actually something the founding fathers anticipated and they asked us to do. If things change, the system must change in order to keep the system working the way it's supposed to. We're not rolling back technology to 1980, but we can take advantage of modern technology in order to build a system that functions the same way the founding fathers hoped our system would function, but maybe even better, because we have options available to us that they didn't. But we can. I do believe the founding fathers had pretty good principles when it came to government. And fortunately, these reforms would simply bring the system back to working the way that they wanted it to.